everybody. Confused a little bit by that opening segment? Soldier, why would you show us a little mini-tage of you dying so many times? Well, this is the first part of the new series called Struggling Over the Hump Day, where every Wednesday I'm going to share with you a struggle that I've dealt with in my life and how I've gone through it. And so I showed you that as kind of a little bit of humor in dealing with death and how I've dealt with death in my life, and some of the ways that I've dealt with it and haven't worked, and some of the ways I've dealt with it and have worked. I'm going to kind of give you guys a 6-step process that I used in order to deal with it properly. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the death that I dealt with. When I was 10 years old, my father died. He was in the Air Force, and he was what's called a pararescueman, a PJ for short, and he was chosen to test out a new prototype parachute in Las Vegas, Nevada, and the parachute didn't open, and his reserve opened about 300 feet above ground, which for anybody who knows, it's too short. He died on impact, and my family was devastated by it. It was the milestone moment in my life. It was the changing moment of my life. Had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be sitting right here talking to you guys at all. I wouldn't have been on YouTube. I don't know. My life would be 100% different. But my initial reaction was like many others. It was complete and utter denial. I was 10 years old. I had no idea how to accept it. I didn't know what to do. He died on a Sunday. I went to school the next day. I went to school on Monday, and everyone's like, "Why are you here?" But part of my initial reaction was not only denial, but it was anger. I was angry. On my way to school, I can count on my hand the number of times I've talked back to my mom in my life, but I talked back to my mom, and she stopped that Suburban in the middle of the street and looked back at me and said, "We've had a death in our family, but that gives you no excuse to disrespect me." We drove to school, and she got to my teacher, and she told her, "Allow him to grieve, but do not allow him to be disrespectful." And within the next few weeks, I called some girl a really bad name and got detention for the first time in my life, and that kind of began my downward spiral of anger. And that was my initial reaction, was denial and anger. And of course, everybody asked the same question: why? Why, God, did you do this? And those who believe in God, you'll ask, well, why, God, did you do this? And other people are like, I don't know why this happened. Why did this happen in general? And so it was a typical reaction, but I was 10. I didn't know how to process it. So my dad was a good dad, though, and I have lots of memories about him, and all these things lead up into the proper process. The way that I dealt with it initially was anger, and that anger got me in a lot of trouble, to where I eventually ended up at a military school, and that military school saved my life. That's where I kind of turned my life around and learned how to deal with death the proper way. And so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys these 6 steps of how I dealt with death. The first step is that you have to allow yourself to grieve. If you've ever been on an airplane before, they always tell you, put on the oxygen mask first and then take care of your children. And so you have to allow yourself to grieve first. You have to cry it out. You have to cry it out. 2 years later, after my dad died when I was 12, I still remember one in particular night where I just started crying, and I fell out of my bed crying. It was an uncontrollable body weight losing cry, where I was in a fetal position, all curled up, just crying, and cried myself to sleep, and woke up in the morning still in that same position. But I remember that was a breaking moment in my life, where I just kind of grieved. I just kind of got it all out. And after you allow yourself to grieve, the second part is you have to allow others to grieve too. There were a lot of people affected by my father's death, A lot of people who I didn't know would be affected by it, you know, who knew him very well or who knew him at all. And so you have to allow those people to grieve, because they grieve in their own way and they grieve in their own time too. It eventually took me 2 years to deal with it, but like you know, a lot of other people, it took a lot shorter time, and it took a lot longer time. So you have to allow others to grieve as well. The third one is, you can't use your sorrow, you can't use your grief as your crutch. You have to acceptance comes later, but you can't just use it as your crutch. It's not an excuse. And so you have to grieve, allow others to grieve, and then begin moving on and say that this is not an excuse in my life, like my mother told me. You have to be held accountable. You have to hold yourself accountable for your emotions. The fourth step is to collect memories. Collect the memories, not necessarily mementos or pictures. I mean, just collect memories mentally, collect them physically, and then have yourself and those closest to you, those closest to the deceased, kind of an unofficial memorial. You have the funeral, you have a memorial. Go out and have a dinner. Go to a spot, you know, where you guys all hung out before, and have yourself kind of an unofficial ceremony where you just tell stories and you just laugh. You kind of celebrate their life. You mourn their life, and you celebrate it. Some people celebrate it at a funeral or a memorial, but just have an unofficial celebration of their life. The fifth one is to stay active. Once you've grieved, once those around you have grieved, and once you've actually collected the memories, you've had yourself a good time, stay active. Get involved in new things. Don't be involved in the same old things that you were involved in when they were alive, because you're just going to get reminded of them every time. And so as part of this moving on and acceptance process, you're going to get involved in new activities. And the last one is the obvious. Accept it. You have to accept that they're gone, and you don't forget about them, but you honor their death with your life. That's the biggest compliment you could pay to the dead, is once you've remembered and accepted that they're gone, now you can honor their death by the way that you live your life. This is kind of how I dealt with death. There are several other ways that I dealt with it specifically. I turned to alcohol at one point in my life, but we'll get to that later on in the series. I turned to drugs, I turned to women, and all three of those things we'll talk about later on in this series. I hope you guys have enjoyed this commentary. Please like, subscribe, share if you want to. Comment. I would love to see your comments on this and how you guys have dealt with death as well. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you online.